Have you ever wondered why you can be doing so much with your life and still feel as though something essential is missing? You may be trying to improve yourself, heal old wounds, make better choices, become more peaceful, repair relationships, understand your purpose, and create a future that feels meaningful. And yet, beneath all that effort, there can remain a quiet exhaustion. Your mind keeps moving from one concern to another, one memory to another, one possibility to another. You solve one problem, and another appears. You reach something you once wanted, and almost immediately the mind begins searching for what comes next. Perhaps the real difficulty is not that you have failed to find what you are looking for. Perhaps you have simply been looking in too many places for something that was never outside you. There is a kind of fragmentation that happens when you give the world responsibility for your inner state. You begin looking to another person for reassurance, to the future for security, to achievement for worth, to circumstances for peace. You may not consciously say, "I need these things to know that I am enough," but somewhere beneath the surface, that belief can quietly guide your life. If this person loves me, I will feel worthy. If this situation works out, I will finally relax. If I can correct what happened yesterday, I will be free. If I can understand exactly what tomorrow will bring, I will stop being afraid. And without realizing it, your attention becomes scattered across everything you cannot completely control. This is where the idea of focusing on one thing takes on a very different meaning. It is not about choosing one goal and refusing to look anywhere else. It is not about becoming more disciplined, productive, or impressive. The one thing may be much quieter than that. It may simply be remembering the inner presence from which you came, the place within you that existed before the world began, telling you what you had to become. You might call that presence God. You might call it source, love, spirit, awareness, or simply the deepest part of yourself. The name is less important than the experience. There are moments when you can sense it. Perhaps you have felt it while watching the morning light move across a quiet room, while standing near the ocean, while holding someone you love, or during those unexpected moments when your thoughts become silent and you realize that nothing is missing right now. For a few seconds, you are not trying to become anything. You are simply present. And then the mind returns. It remembers what someone said yesterday. It imagines what could go wrong tomorrow. It compares your life with another person's life. It tells you that you should be further along by now. It asks whether people understand you, whether they appreciate you, whether you made the right decision, whether there is still enough time. Before long, the peaceful presence you touched seems to disappear beneath the noise. But perhaps it did not disappear. Consider the sky during a storm. Clouds can become so thick that you cannot see the blue above them. Thunder may fill the air, rain may cover everything, and for a while it can seem as though the entire sky has become the storm. Yet the blue sky has not been destroyed. It remains exactly where it was, beyond what is temporarily passing through it. Your inner peace may be like that. Fear can pass through you without becoming who you are. Sadness can visit without defining your entire existence. Uncertainty can appear without proving that life has abandoned you. Even resentment, regret, and loneliness can be seen as movements within consciousness rather than permanent truths about yourself. The difficulty begins when you identify completely with what is passing through. You say, "I am afraid," rather than noticing. Fear is here. You say, "I am lost," rather than recognizing, "I cannot yet see where this season is leading." You say, "I am not enough," when perhaps what is really happening is that a frightened part of the mind is comparing your life with an image of what it thinks your life should be. That small shift in awareness can change the way you meet yourself. You no longer have to fight every thought. You do not have to punish yourself for being anxious. You do not have to become angry at your own sadness or ashamed that you still carry wounds you thought you had healed. Awareness allows you to sit beside your experience rather than drown inside it. And from that quieter place, you begin to recognize something important. The part of you that can observe the fear is not the fear itself. There is something within you that remains aware. That awareness may be the doorway back to the one thing. Imagine a river flowing through a forest. Leaves fall into it. Branches drift across its surface. Rain changes its depth. Seasons change the landscape around it. Yet the river does not spend its life trying to hold on to every leaf that touches the water. It receives, carries, and releases. Human beings often do something very different. Someone hurt you 10 years ago, and the mind keeps the moment alive. A relationship ends, and you continue having conversations with that person in your imagination. You make a mistake, and instead of allowing the experience to teach you and move through you, you turn it into an identity. This is who I am. This is what always happens to me. This is why I cannot trust life. And slowly, yesterday begins occupying today. You may even carry tomorrow before it arrives. You imagine conversations that have not happened. You prepare for rejection that may never come. You rehearse disasters because the mind believes that worrying about pain might somehow protect you from pain. It is exhausting to live in 3 different times at once. Your body is sitting here, but your mind is in yesterday and tomorrow. And then you wonder why you feel disconnected from yourself. Perhaps the invitation is not to control the mind more aggressively, but to notice where it keeps taking you. Awareness does not need to shout. It simply notices. There I go again, searching outside myself for reassurance. There I go trying to change the past. There I go asking another person's opinion to determine my worth. There I go, believing that peace will arrive when life finally behaves the way I want it to. There is no judgment required in this noticing. In fact, judgment would only create another layer of struggle. You can meet these patterns gently because they are often attempts to protect you. The mind learned to seek approval because rejection once hurt. It learned to control because uncertainty felt frightening. It learned to hold resentment because it thought anger might prevent you from being wounded again. It learned comparison because somewhere along the way you began believing that your value could be measured against someone else's life. You do not have to hate the ego in order to become free from its direction. You only have to become aware of when it is speaking. And this may be where your understanding of success begins to change. Perhaps a successful life is not a life in which everything happens according to your preferences. Perhaps it is not a life without disappointment, uncertainty, loss, aging, difficult relationships, or unanswered questions. Maybe there is another kind of success that the world rarely teaches you to recognize. The ability to move through changing circumstances without continually abandoning yourself. What would happen if that became your one focus? Not controlling everything, not pleasing everyone, not proving your worth, not becoming someone else, simply returning. Returning to love when fear pulls you away. Returning to awareness when the mind becomes crowded. Returning to forgiveness when yesterday tries to become today. Returning to trust when you cannot see what comes next. Returning to the quiet recognition that beneath all the identities you have accumulated, there is something in you that has never needed to prove its right to exist. A tree does not wake each morning wondering whether it deserves sunlight. A flower does not compare the timing of its opening with the flower beside it. The ocean does not apologize for the rhythm of its tides. Nature seems to contain an intelligence that does not need constant approval, and you are not separate from nature. The same life that moves through the tree moves through you. The same mysterious intelligence that turns the seed toward the light beats your heart without requiring your conscious instruction. You may discover that there is more wisdom carrying you than the frightened mind has been willing to trust. Maybe this is why silence can feel so uncomfortable at first. When the distractions disappear, you begin hearing the patterns that have been directing your life. But if you remain there gently, something deeper may also become audible. Not a voice giving you every answer, something quieter, a sense that you are still here, a sense that beneath everything you are trying to fix, there is already something whole. And perhaps the one thing you have been searching for is not another destination at all. Perhaps it is the place within yourself from which you are always meant to live. The question then becomes not whether you can remove every distraction from your life, but whether you can recognize what keeps pulling you away from that inner center. And to understand that, you have to look more closely at the part of the mind that is always searching, comparing, controlling, fearing, and asking the outside world to complete what can only be remembered within. There is a part of the mind that seems to believe it must constantly search in order to keep you safe. It searches for what could go wrong, for what someone might be thinking about you, for evidence that you are falling behind, for signs that you have made the wrong decision. It looks into the past for mistakes and into the future for threats. And because this voice has been with you for so long, you may have mistaken it for your deepest self. But what if it is not? What if much of the noise inside you is simply the ego trying to create certainty in a life that was never designed to be completely certain? The ego is not something you need to destroy. It does not need to become another enemy. It can be understood as the part of consciousness that builds an identity from separation. It says, this is me, and everything else is outside me. Therefore, I must protect myself. I must prove myself. I must make sure I am accepted. I must control what happens next. From this perspective, life becomes an endless negotiation. You negotiate with people for approval. You negotiate with circumstances for security. You negotiate with the future for happiness. And sometimes you even negotiate with God. If this happens the way I want, then I will trust. If this person stays, then I will believe I am loved. If this door opens, then I will know I am being guided. But spiritual trust begins somewhere else. It begins when you stop demanding that life prove itself to you before you are willing to be at peace. Think about how much energy can disappear into the need for control. Perhaps someone you love has become distant. You notice a change in their voice. They take longer to respond. Something feels different, and immediately the mind begins constructing possibilities. Did I do something wrong? Are they leaving? Have they stopped caring? Should I say something? Should I wait? Before anything has actually been explained, you may already have lived through 20 different versions of the future. This is what fear often does. It does not simply respond to reality. It creates realities in the imagination and then asks the body to react as though they are already happening. Your heart tightens. Your breathing changes. You lose sleep over a conversation that has never taken place. You become emotionally exhausted by an event that exists only as a possibility. Then, because the discomfort becomes difficult to tolerate, you may try to control the other person. You ask for reassurance repeatedly. You analyze every word. You try to become more pleasing, more useful, more agreeable, hoping that if you can become exactly what they need, you can prevent yourself from being abandoned. But something important is lost in this process. You abandon yourself. You leave your own center and begin living inside another person's reactions. If they are warm, you feel worthy. If they are distant, you question yourself. If they praise you, you relax. If they criticize you, you become disturbed. Your inner state rises and falls according to something outside you. This does not mean relationships should not matter. Love naturally makes us vulnerable. Caring about another person is part of being human, but there is a difference between loving someone and asking them to carry responsibility for your identity. Love says, I value your presence. Fear says, without your presence, I cannot be whole. And perhaps awareness begins when you can gently notice which voice is speaking. You may discover the same pattern in comparison. You open your phone and see another person's life. They appear happier, younger, more confident, more loved, more certain of where they are going. You see one photograph, one announcement, one carefully selected moment, and suddenly your own life feels smaller. The ego loves comparison because comparison gives it something to measure. Am I ahead? Am I behind? Do I have enough? Am I enough? But the moment you ask whether your life is enough by measuring it against someone else's path, you forget something very simple. No two lives unfold according to exactly the same rhythm. Look at a garden. One flower opens early in the season, another remains closed. A tree may spend years developing roots before it produces the growth that anyone can see. If you looked only at the surface, you might decide that the tree was doing nothing. But life is happening underground. Perhaps some seasons of your own life have been like that. There may have been periods when nothing seemed to be moving. You watched other people begin relationships, change careers, travel, create families, discover new directions, while you felt as though you were standing still. You may have asked, what is wrong with me? But what if nothing was wrong? What if some seasons are not meant for visible expansion? There are seasons for roots. There are seasons for releasing. There are seasons for learning what you can no longer carry. There are seasons when the most meaningful movement happens in places nobody else can see. The ego does not like invisible growth because it wants evidence. It wants something that can be measured, displayed, compared, and confirmed. The deeper self is less concerned with appearances. It asks a different question. Am I becoming more available to love? Am I becoming less controlled by fear? Can I meet this moment without abandoning my peace? These questions change the direction of your attention. Instead of looking outward for proof that your life matters, you begin looking inward at the quality of consciousness you bring to your life. And this is where the meaning of focusing on one thing becomes clearer. Your one focus is not a single external destination. It is your inner alignment. Everything else can change. People can come and go. Plans can succeed or collapse. Your body can age. Your roles can change. Your children can grow. A career that once defined you can end. A home can be left behind. A relationship you believed would last forever can become a memory. If your identity is attached completely to these changing forms, every change will feel like the disappearance of part of yourself. But what if there is something within you that does not disappear when the forms change? You can begin to sense it through awareness. Imagine you are sitting quietly one evening. There is nothing extraordinary happening. Perhaps you are drinking tea near a window. The day has been difficult. Someone disappointed you. Something you hoped for did not happen. Your mind wants to replay the entire situation. Normally, you might follow it. You might rehearse what you should have said. You might imagine confronting the person. You might create arguments in which you finally make them understand how deeply they hurt you. But this time, you simply notice. You notice the tension in your body. You notice the desire to be right. You notice the story forming. And instead of judging yourself, you become curious. What am I really asking for right now? Perhaps beneath the anger is a wish to be understood. Beneath the wish to be understood is a wish to feel valued. And beneath the wish to feel valued is an old belief that your value must somehow be confirmed from outside. Suddenly, the conflict is no longer only about the other person. It has become a doorway into yourself. This is what awareness can do. It does not always change the situation immediately. It changes your relationship to the situation. And that change can be the beginning of freedom. You may still need to have a difficult conversation. You may need to establish a boundary. You may decide that a relationship is no longer healthy for you. Spiritual peace does not mean allowing people to treat you carelessly. It does not mean pretending that pain is pleasant or that every relationship must continue. Peace means you no longer need hatred in order to make a clear decision. You can say no without making another person your enemy. You can walk away without carrying them with you in resentment. You can protect your inner space without closing your heart. That is a very different kind of strength. The ego often tells you that anger keeps you powerful. It says, do not forgive. If you forgive, they win. But forgiveness was never about deciding who won. Forgiveness is about deciding what you are willing to continue carrying. Imagine holding a burning coal because someone else handed it to you. You may have every reason to be angry about receiving it. You may explain for years how unfair it was that they placed it in your hand. And you may be completely correct. But your hand is still burning. At some point, the question becomes less about whether they deserved your anger and more about whether you deserve your freedom. Forgiveness does not erase memory. It does not require reconciliation. It does not mean returning to harmful circumstances. It means gradually releasing the emotional demand that yesterday become different from what it was. Yesterday cannot become different, and there can be tremendous peace in finally allowing that truth. Much suffering comes from arguing internally with what has already happened. They should not have left. They should have understood me. My childhood should have been different. I should not have made that mistake. I should have seen it coming. Perhaps all of these thoughts contain understandable pain, yet they also ask reality to rewrite something that has already occurred. The moment you stop demanding that the past change, you begin recovering the energy you have been sending backward. This is not resignation. It is acceptance. Acceptance says, this happened. I may not like it. I may still feel sadness, but I will no longer require the past to become different before I allow myself to live fully today. That is a profound form of letting go. And the same principle applies to the future. The mind says, I need to know what will happen. Life says, you can only meet what is here. The mind says, show me that everything will work out. Life says, can you trust yourself even when you cannot see the outcome? This is where uncertainty can become a spiritual teacher. Most people do not fear the future simply because it is unknown. They fear the feeling they imagine they will experience if the future does not go according to plan. You may think you are afraid of losing a relationship, but beneath that may be a fear of loneliness. You may think you are afraid of changing direction, but beneath that may be a fear of regret. You may think you are afraid of aging, but beneath that may be a fear that time is taking away the identity you have known. And because these feelings seem threatening, the ego tries to control circumstances so that you will never have to experience them. But perhaps the deeper path is not to guarantee that you will never feel pain. Perhaps it is to discover that you can meet pain without losing yourself. You have already survived moments you once believed would destroy you. There were nights when you did not know how you would move forward. There were losses you thought you would never accept. There were versions of yourself that disappeared. And still, here you are. Not untouched, not unchanged. But here, maybe this is evidence of something deeper than your ability to control life. Perhaps there is an intelligence within you that knows how to move through seasons of change. A river does not need to see the ocean in order to continue flowing toward it. It bends, it encounters stones, it narrows, it widens. Sometimes it moves quickly, and sometimes it seems almost still. But it does not stop being a river because the landscape changes. What if your life is asking for that kind of trust? Not passive trust, not the belief that you should simply do nothing. You can still make choices. You can still speak honestly. You can still follow an intention. But you begin acting without insisting that your peace depends upon the result. This is one of the most liberating shifts you can make. You begin to say, I will bring love to this choice, and I will release my demand to control everything that follows. You begin to understand that intention and attachment are not the same thing. Intention says, this is the direction of my heart. Attachment says, life must give me this exact result or I cannot be at peace. One creates openness. The other creates fear. You can feel the difference in your body. Think about something you deeply want right now. Perhaps it is healing in a relationship, clarity about your direction, relief from financial uncertainty, reconciliation with someone you love, or simply the feeling that your life makes sense again. Notice what happens when you think, this must happen. There may be tension. Now imagine saying, this is what I deeply hope for. I will move toward it with sincerity, but I am willing to trust that my life may contain wisdom I cannot yet see. Something softens. The circumstances have not changed. You have changed your relationship to them. And this is where the ego begins losing its grip. Not because you fought it, but because you stopped believing every thought it offered you. You realize that a thought is not a command. Fear is not prophecy. Comparison is not truth. Someone else's opinion is not your identity. A painful past is not your destiny. And uncertainty is not evidence that you have been abandoned. These realizations do not usually arrive once and remain forever. You may understand them deeply in the morning and forget them by afternoon. Someone may criticize you and suddenly you are back inside an old wound. Something unexpected may happen and fear takes over again. That is all right. The spiritual journey may not be about never leaving your center. It may be about learning how to return. Return. That word carries such gentleness. You are not failing when you become afraid. You are being invited to return. You are not spiritually lost because you become angry. You are being invited to return. You are not broken because you compare yourself with someone else. You have simply wandered into an old pattern, and awareness can bring you home again. This is why the one thing matters. When the world offers you 1,000 directions, you need an inner direction. When fear offers you 1,000 possible futures, return to this moment. When comparison tells you who you should become, return to who you are. When resentment pulls you backward, return to forgiveness. When control tightens around your life, return to trust. When the ego says you are separate, alone, and incomplete, return to the possibility that the same source that moves through all of life is also moving through you. You do not need to force yourself into this understanding. You can practice noticing. Perhaps tomorrow morning, before reaching for your phone, you might remain still for a few moments. Feel your breath. Notice that before you remember your problems, before you remember your name, your responsibilities, your age, your history, there is simply awareness. You are here. Life is here. For a few moments, nothing needs to be proven. And if the mind immediately begins presenting its list of worries, you can observe it with kindness. There is the mind trying to protect me again. You do not need to follow every invitation it gives you. There is a wonderful freedom in discovering that you can have a fearful thought without building a home inside it. You can have an angry thought without feeding it for 3 days. You can remember a painful event without becoming the person you were when it happened. You can feel uncertainty without demanding an immediate answer. This is awareness becoming freedom. And slowly, the space between what happens and how you respond begins to grow. Someone says something unkind. In the past, you might have reacted immediately. Now there is a moment of awareness. A plan changes unexpectedly. In the past, fear might have taken over. Now there is a breath. You see someone whose life appears further ahead than yours. In the past, comparison might have diminished your own journey. Now you can remember that their season has nothing to say about the worth of yours. This space is where choice begins. And within that choice, you may discover the presence of something much larger than the ego. Call it Source if that language speaks to you. Imagine Source not as something distant that watches your life from somewhere beyond you, but as the loving intelligence already present within life itself. The intelligence that knows how to heal a cut, how to turn a seed into a tree, how to move the seasons without your supervision. Perhaps spiritual alignment is simply becoming less resistant to that intelligence. The ego says, I must control. The deeper self whispers, I can participate. The ego says, I must know. The deeper self says, I can listen. The ego says, I must prove that I am worthy. The deeper self remembers, life itself has already included me. And something changes when you begin living from that remembrance. You stop chasing every thought. You stop making every fear sacred. You stop allowing every person's opinion to enter the deepest room of your consciousness. You become more selective about what you carry, not because you have become indifferent, but because you have begun recognizing that your inner peace is sacred. And once you see this, another question naturally appears. If you are no longer going to organize your life around fear, comparison, resentment, and control, what will you organize it around? What does it actually look like to live from the true self rather than merely understand the idea? Perhaps the answer begins with something that sounds simple but can transform everything. Learning to release what you have been carrying, forgive what no longer belongs in the present, and trust that love can guide you more wisely than fear ever could. Perhaps one of the greatest changes in your life begins when you stop asking, how can I make everything happen the way I want? And begin asking, how can I remain connected to who I truly am while life unfolds? These questions may sound similar, but they come from very different places. The first is often born from fear. The second is born from awareness. One tries to arrange the world so that you can finally feel peaceful. The other recognizes that peace can become the place from which you meet the world. This is where returning to your true self becomes more than an idea. It becomes a way of living. Your true self is not a perfected version of your personality. It is not the person you imagine you will become after you have healed every wound, solved every problem, and overcome every fear. It is closer than that. It is the awareness beneath the personality, the quiet presence that can notice your thoughts without becoming imprisoned by them. It is the part of you that still knows how to love even after disappointment, that still recognizes beauty after loss, that can still feel compassion even when the ego would rather remain angry. You are not creating this self. You are remembering it, and remembrance often begins with releasing what has covered it. Imagine a window that has collected dust for many years. The sunlight has not disappeared. Nothing has happened to the sun. Yet less light enters the room because something has accumulated between the light and the space it wants to illuminate. Resentment can be like that dust. Fear can be like that dust. Old guilt, shame, judgment, and the need to be right can slowly cover the inner window. Then one day you look around and wonder why life feels so dark. You may begin searching for more light outside yourself when perhaps what is needed is not another source of light, but a willingness to clear what has been preventing you from recognizing the light already present. Forgiveness is one way of clearing that window. There may be someone whose name still changes something inside your body. Perhaps years have passed, yet when you remember what happened, you feel the same contraction. Maybe they betrayed you. Maybe they left when you needed them. Maybe they spoke words that stayed with you far longer than they ever imagined. You may have told yourself that you have moved on because you no longer see them. But physical distance and emotional freedom are not always the same thing. Sometimes people leave your life while continuing to occupy your consciousness. You wake up thinking about what they did. You imagine what you would say if you saw them again. You hope that one day they will understand the pain they caused. Perhaps part of you wants them to experience the same suffering so that somehow the scales will become balanced. These feelings are deeply human. There is no need to shame yourself for them. But eventually you may ask a more liberating question: how long do I want this person to continue living inside me? Forgiveness is not a gift you give to someone because their behavior was acceptable. It is a gift you offer yourself because your consciousness deserves to be free. You can forgive and still maintain distance. You can forgive and still say no. You can forgive without returning to a relationship. You can forgive without pretending that something did not hurt. Forgiveness simply begins with the willingness to stop using yesterday's wound as today's identity. Perhaps you can imagine placing the memory gently in your hands. Instead of fighting it, you acknowledge it. Yes, this hurt me. Yes, I wish it had been different. Yes, part of me still carries sadness. And then perhaps another sentence can arise. But I do not want this pain to decide who I become. Something begins to loosen. Not always immediately. Forgiveness may happen in layers. You may release someone today and feel anger again next week. That does not mean you failed. It may simply mean another layer has become visible. Healing is often less like closing a door and more like watching a season change. Winter does not become spring in one dramatic moment. The air softens little by little. Ice begins to melt where no one is watching. Small signs of life appear. Then one morning you realize that the landscape has changed. Your inner life can change this way too. There may come a day when you remember someone who once caused tremendous pain and you notice that your body no longer tightens in the same way. The memory remains. The prison does not. And perhaps there is someone else you need to forgive. Yourself. For many people, this is more difficult. You may carry a private list of moments you wish you could redo. A relationship you stayed in too long, a person you hurt, an opportunity you were afraid to take, years you believe you wasted, words you wish you could pull back from the past. You may look at who you were then, using the awareness you have now, and ask, how could I have done that? But the person you were then did not possess everything you know now. You were responding from the consciousness available to you at that moment. Perhaps you were frightened. Perhaps you were seeking love in places that could not give it. Perhaps you were trying to protect wounds you did not yet understand. This does not remove responsibility. It makes transformation possible. There is a difference between responsibility and self-punishment. Responsibility says, I see what happened. I will learn. I will repair what I can. I will choose differently. Self-punishment says, because I made this mistake, I must continue suffering. One leads toward growth. The other keeps the past alive. Imagine planting a seed and then digging it up every morning to criticize it for not becoming a tree sooner. Nothing grows under constant disturbance. Your own spirit needs some gentleness too. You can learn from your past without living there. You can acknowledge what you regret without making regret your permanent home. Perhaps you can look back at the person you once were with the same compassion you would offer a frightened child. You would not tell that child, you should have known everything already. You might say, you were learning, you were afraid. Come home now. Maybe that is what self-forgiveness really is. Coming home. And when you begin coming home to yourself, surrender starts to make sense. Surrender is often misunderstood as giving up. But spiritually, surrender can be something very different. It can mean releasing your argument with life. You still participate. You still choose. You still speak, act, create, care, and respond. But you stop insisting that you must control every result. Think of how often you have tried to force a particular outcome because you believed that outcome was necessary for your happiness. Perhaps you wanted someone to love you. You gave more than you genuinely wanted to give. You ignored your own needs. You became whoever you thought they wanted. You kept trying to convince them of your worth, and perhaps the relationship still ended. At first, this may have felt like failure. But years later, you may look back and realize that losing what you desperately tried to keep brought you closer to yourself. The ending forced you into silence. The silence forced you to listen. And listening revealed how far you had traveled from your own center while trying to keep another person close. What appeared to be rejection may eventually have become a doorway. This does not mean every painful event is secretly something you should celebrate. Pain is pain. Loss deserves to be grieved. But there may be wisdom in allowing yourself to ask, what is this experience showing me that I could not see before? That question transforms suffering from a closed room into a doorway. You may not understand the answer immediately. Sometimes understanding arrives years later. A river does not know every landscape it will cross when it begins moving from the mountain. It simply follows the pull that carries it downward. It meets rocks, bends around obstacles, enters valleys, disappears beneath shadows, and continues. If the river insisted on moving only in a straight line, it would spend its entire existence fighting the earth. Human beings often do something similar. We create a picture of how life should unfold. By this age, I should be here. This relationship should have lasted. My children should understand me. My body should still feel the way it once did. I should have found my purpose by now. And whenever reality moves differently, we interpret the bend in the river as evidence that something has gone wrong. But perhaps the bend is part of the journey. Aging can teach this in a particularly tender way. You look in the mirror and notice changes. Perhaps you cannot do everything as easily as you once did. People you love may have left this world. Children grow older. Places that once felt permanent change. The ego can respond with resistance. It wants to freeze life. It wants the body to remain the same, relationships to remain the same, familiar roles to remain the same. But life does not express itself through permanence. It expresses itself through movement. The leaves appear, deepen in color, fall, and return in another season. The wave rises and disappears back into the ocean. The flower opens and eventually releases its petals. Nothing in nature seems ashamed of changing form. Perhaps aging is not simply life taking things away from you. Perhaps it can also become an invitation to discover what remains when some of the identities you once depended upon begin falling away. Who are you when you are no longer young? Who are you when your children no longer need you in the same way? Who are you when a career ends? Who are you when a role that once defined you disappears? These questions can be frightening if your identity has been built entirely from form, but they can also become sacred questions. Because beneath every role, something has been present throughout your entire life. The child you were had different thoughts from the adult you became. Your body changed. Your preferences changed. Your relationships changed. Yet there has always been a sense of awareness watching these changes. That presence may be closer to your true nature than any role you have ever played. When you begin recognizing this, you stop asking life to preserve every form forever. You begin trusting the movement. Trust does not mean you know what comes next. Trust means you do not need to know everything in order to remain open. And perhaps this is where intention becomes important. There is a difference between living with intention and living with demands. A demand says, this must happen. An intention says, this is the quality I choose to bring. You may not control whether another person understands you, but you can intend to communicate with honesty and kindness. You may not control whether a relationship continues, but you can intend to love without abandoning yourself. You may not control how quickly a wound heals, but you can intend to meet yourself with compassion during the healing. You may not control tomorrow, but you can choose what you bring into this moment. And perhaps your deepest intention can be remarkably simple. Let me remain connected to love. That may be the one thing. Before an important conversation, instead of asking, how do I make them agree with me, you can ask, how can I remain connected to love while speaking honestly? When uncertainty appears, instead of asking, how can I guarantee the future, you can ask, how can I remain connected to trust while taking the next step? When someone criticizes you, instead of asking, how can I prove them wrong, you can ask, can I remain connected to myself without turning them into an enemy? This does not make you passive. It makes your actions less contaminated by fear. You may discover that love sometimes speaks softly and sometimes says a clear no. Love can stay. Love can leave. Love can forgive. Love can create boundaries. Love can grieve. Love can tell the truth. Living from love does not mean becoming endlessly agreeable. It means allowing your actions to arise from a deeper place than fear, resentment, or the need for approval. There may be moments when someone asks you to betray yourself in order to keep their affection. The old pattern might say yes. You fear disappointing them. You fear being misunderstood. You fear that setting a boundary will make them leave. But something quieter within you may say, if I must abandon myself to keep this relationship, then I am not really choosing love. I am choosing fear. That recognition can be painful, but it can also be freeing. People-pleasing often appears compassionate from the outside. Yet underneath it may be a hidden bargain. I will become what you need so that you will not reject me. True kindness does not require this bargain. You can care about another person's feelings without making them responsible for your worth. You can disappoint someone and still love them. You can be misunderstood and remain peaceful. You can allow someone to have an opinion about you without turning their opinion into your identity. This is what inner alignment begins to feel like. The outside world does not suddenly become easy. You simply stop leaving yourself every time it becomes difficult. And when you stop abandoning yourself, you become more available to the source within. Perhaps you can imagine source as an ocean and your individual life as a wave. A wave has a temporary shape. It rises, moves, changes, and eventually returns. If the wave could think, perhaps it might become frightened by its temporary form. I must remain this height. I must travel further than the wave beside me. I must not disappear. But the wave was never separate from the ocean. Its deepest identity was always water. Maybe much of human fear comes from forgetting the ocean. We become obsessed with the temporary shape of our lives, our age, our appearance, our possessions, our relationships, our reputation, our history. We compare one wave with another. But beneath all these forms, perhaps we participate in something immeasurably larger. If you could remember that even briefly, how might you treat yourself differently? How might you treat the person who hurt you? Not by pretending the hurt did not matter, but by recognizing that hatred keeps you bound to the very experience you want to escape. How might you approach uncertainty? Perhaps you would still feel fear, but you would no longer interpret fear as proof that you are alone. How might you approach your purpose? Maybe purpose would stop being one grand destination you must discover before time runs out. Perhaps purpose could become the quality of presence you bring to whatever life places before you. You may be washing dishes, listening to someone who is lonely, walking through a difficult season, caring for an aging parent, beginning again after a loss, sitting quietly with your own heart. There can be purpose in all of it when you are fully present. The ego asks, is this important enough? The deeper self asks, am I here? And perhaps being here is where life actually happens. Not in the imagined future where everything has finally been resolved. Not in the past where you wish things had gone differently. Here, this breath, this conversation, this ordinary afternoon, this moment that appears so small and yet contains the only place where you can ever experience love. You cannot love yesterday. You can remember loving yesterday. You cannot love tomorrow. You can imagine loving tomorrow, but love itself can only be lived now. So if you choose one thing, perhaps choose this. Return to the presence of love within you as often as you remember. You will forget, then return. You will become afraid. Return. You will compare yourself. Return. You will become angry and perhaps say something you regret. Acknowledge it, make amends where you can, forgive yourself, and return. You will try to control an outcome. Notice the tension, soften your grip, and return. There is no spiritual perfection required here. Only remembrance. This is why your difficult moments do not have to become evidence that you are failing spiritually. They can become bells calling you home. Anxiety can whisper, return. Resentment can whisper, there is something here ready to be released. Comparison can whisper, you have forgotten your own path. The need for approval can whisper, you have temporarily forgotten where your worth comes from. Even fear can become a teacher when you stop treating it as an enemy. You can place a hand over your heart and quietly recognize, something in me is afraid. Not, I am fear. Something in me is afraid. And then perhaps you can offer that frightened part of yourself the presence you have spent your life asking others to provide. I am here. You do not have to know everything. We can take one step. We can let life reveal the next. This is self-love without performance. It is not telling yourself that you are better than anyone else. It is simply refusing to treat yourself as less worthy of compassion than everyone else. And from this place, gratitude begins to arise naturally. Not forced gratitude, not pretending everything is wonderful. A quieter gratitude. Gratitude that says, even in this uncertain season, life is still moving through me. You notice the breath you did not have to earn, the sunlight arriving through the window, a stranger's kindness, the sound of rain, a meal, a memory that makes you smile, a person who stayed, a lesson from someone who did not. The fact that after everything you have lived through, your heart still has the capacity to soften. Gratitude gathers your attention from the 1,000 places it has wandered and returns it to what is here. And perhaps that is why gratitude feels so peaceful. It does not require tomorrow to give you something before you can recognize the sacredness of today. When you live this way, the meaning of success becomes almost unrecognizable compared with what you may once have believed. Success becomes waking up without immediately abandoning yourself to fear. It becomes forgiving what you once thought you could never release. It becomes allowing another person to be who they are without requiring their approval to know who you are. It becomes trusting life enough to take the next step without demanding to see the entire road. It becomes recognizing that your peace does not have to wait for every problem to disappear. And slowly, the one thing becomes clearer. It was never something you had to chase. It was never hidden at the end of some distant road. It was the loving presence beneath all your searching, the source beneath all your identities, the awareness beneath all your thoughts, the quiet wholeness beneath all the stories telling you that you were incomplete. You have spent so much time trying to become someone who would finally deserve peace. Perhaps now you can consider another possibility. Perhaps peace was never a reward for becoming someone else. Perhaps it has always been an invitation to remember who you are. And once you begin remembering, the final question becomes wonderfully practical. How do you carry this remembrance into an ordinary morning, a difficult conversation, a moment of anxiety, a season of uncertainty? How do you live this truth when the world becomes noisy again? Perhaps it begins not with a dramatic transformation, but with a few quiet choices repeated each day until returning to yourself becomes more natural than running away. And so perhaps the question is no longer, how can I finally get my whole life under control? Perhaps the gentler question is, how can I remember what matters when life becomes noisy again? Because life will become noisy. There will still be unexpected news, difficult conversations, uncertain mornings, changing relationships, and moments when an old fear returns without invitation. The purpose of inner awareness is not to create a life in which nothing disturbs you. It is to help you remember where home is when disturbance appears. This is where spiritual understanding becomes something you live rather than something you merely think about. You do not need an elaborate ritual. You do not need to withdraw from ordinary life. Your daily life itself can become the practice. The traffic, the unanswered message, the difficult person, the unexpected delay, the lonely evening, the quiet morning. The moment you catch yourself comparing your journey with someone else's, each of these can become an invitation to return. Perhaps tomorrow morning, before you allow the world into your consciousness, you can give yourself a few moments of stillness, before the phone, before the news. Before remembering everything you believe you need to solve, simply notice that you are alive. Feel one breath enter, feel one breath leave. Notice that life is already happening without your effort. Your heart is beating, your body is breathing. Morning has arrived. You did not personally command the sun to rise. You did not instruct the earth to continue turning. There is an intelligence within life that has been functioning long before your anxious mind began trying to manage everything. For a few moments, perhaps you can rest inside that recognition. You might quietly ask yourself, what do I want to bring into this day? Not what do I need to accomplish so I can feel worthy? Not how can I make everyone understand me? Not even how can I guarantee that today goes well? Simply, what quality of being do I want to bring? Perhaps the answer is patience, perhaps kindness, perhaps courage, perhaps forgiveness, perhaps simply peace. This is intention in its gentlest form. You are not telling life what it must give you. You are deciding what you wish to give to life. And then the day begins. Someone may irritate you. Something may not happen according to your plan. An old memory may return. And suddenly you notice yourself moving away from the center you touched that morning. This is the moment that matters. Not because you must respond perfectly, but because you can become aware. There I go again. There is no need for condemnation. You can simply return. One conscious breath can sometimes create enough space for you to see that you have a choice. Maybe you do not need to send that angry message immediately. Maybe you do not need to defend yourself against every criticism. Maybe you do not need to solve tomorrow tonight. Maybe another person's bad mood does not have to become your inner weather. This is how peace begins entering ordinary moments. It is rarely dramatic. It may simply be the decision not to continue an argument in your own mind after the conversation has ended. It may be choosing to put down your phone when comparison begins, stealing your gratitude. It may be looking at someone you love and listening without preparing your response. It may be recognizing that you are tired and allowing yourself to rest without turning rest into guilt. These moments may look small from the outside, but your inner life is built from moments like these. A garden does not become beautiful because someone pulls the plants upward and demands that they grow faster. It becomes beautiful through attention, water, light, patience, space. The gardener participates, but does not control the mystery of growth. Perhaps your consciousness deserves the same tenderness. You can water it with gratitude. You can give it light through awareness. You can remove the weeds of resentment through forgiveness. You can create space through silence. And then you can trust that something deeper knows how to grow. At the end of the day, perhaps you can sit quietly again. Not to judge yourself, not to calculate whether you were spiritual enough. Simply to notice, where did fear lead me today? Where did I choose love? Where did I abandon myself for someone's approval? Where did I remember who I am? Is there someone I am carrying into tomorrow whom I could begin releasing tonight? These are not questions meant to create guilt. They are questions that bring light into consciousness. Awareness itself begins changing what it touches. If you notice that you reacted from fear, you do not need to build another story about how badly you failed. You can simply recognize it. I see that now. That recognition is already different from unconscious reaction. Perhaps you can forgive yourself before you sleep, and perhaps there is someone else you can release as well. You do not need to call them. You do not need to tell them. You might simply say inwardly, I no longer want to carry this pain in the same way. Maybe you cannot completely forgive tonight. That is all right. Begin with willingness. Sometimes freedom begins before forgiveness is complete. It begins the moment you become willing to stop feeding the wound. And then there is gratitude. Before sleep, perhaps you can remember one thing that was quietly good, not something extraordinary. Maybe someone smiled at you. Maybe your body carried you through another day. Maybe you heard a song you love. Maybe you saw the evening sky. Maybe someone remembered to ask how you were doing. Maybe nothing happened except that you survived a difficult day without giving up on yourself. Let that be enough. Gratitude is not denial of suffering. It is the refusal to let suffering become the only thing you see. There can be grief and gratitude in the same heart. There can be uncertainty and peace in the same moment. There can be an unanswered question and still a sense that you are held by something larger than the question. This is why you do not need to wait until life becomes perfect before you begin living peacefully. If you wait for everyone to understand you, you may wait forever. If you wait until nothing uncertain remains, you may never rest. If you wait until the past no longer hurts before allowing yourself joy, you may overlook the beauty that is trying to reach you now. Peace cannot depend entirely upon conditions, because conditions are always changing. The weather changes, bodies change, people change, plans change, the world changes. But perhaps beneath all that movement, there is a presence within you that can learn to remain rooted. Think of a tree in strong wind. Its branches move, its leaves tremble. It does not remain rigid. Its strength comes partly from its ability to bend while remaining rooted. Maybe inner peace is like that. You do not become someone who never feels. You become someone who can feel deeply without losing connection with the ground beneath you. You can grieve and remain connected to love. You can be uncertain and remain connected to trust. You can be disappointed and remain connected to yourself. You can be afraid and still remember that fear is passing through a much larger awareness. And each time you remember, something becomes lighter. This may be the one focus that changes everything else. Not because focusing on your inner alignment guarantees that the world will give you everything you want. It does something far more meaningful. It frees you from requiring the world to give you yourself. You stop asking another person to provide your worth. You stop asking tomorrow to provide your peace. You stop asking achievement to provide your identity. You stop asking the past to give you permission to live today. And gradually, you discover that what you were searching for has been quietly waiting beneath the searching. The love, the awareness, the stillness, the connection, the source within. Perhaps you have never truly been separated from it. Perhaps you only became distracted. And if that is true, then the spiritual journey is not a journey towards something far away. It is a return, again and again. You return when you wake up. You return when you forgive. You return when you release the need to control. You return when you notice fear without becoming fear. You return when you choose gratitude in an imperfect moment. You return when you look at yourself with compassion instead of judgment. And one day, you may realize that returning has become easier. The things that once controlled your inner world no longer have the same power. You still feel disappointment, but you do not live inside it for as long. You still encounter difficult people, but you do not automatically carry their energy home. You still experience uncertainty, but you no longer interpret every unknown as danger. You still have memories, but they have become part of your story rather than the author of your future. This is inner freedom. Quiet, unimpressive to the ego, impossible to measure from the outside, and profoundly meaningful. So if you choose to focus on one thing, perhaps let it be this: remember where your peace comes from. Not from having everyone approve of you, not from controlling every outcome, not from becoming someone else. Return to the loving presence already within you. Let that presence guide your words. Let it soften your judgments. Let it remind you when resentment becomes heavy. Let it sit beside you when the future is uncertain. Let it whisper that you do not need to understand the entire journey to take the next peaceful step. And when you forget, as every human being does, simply begin again. No punishment, no spiritual scorekeeping, no belief that you have ruined your progress. Just return. The ocean does not reject a wave because it wandered toward the shore. The sky does not reject a cloud because it temporarily covered the light. The source does not become distant because you had a difficult day. Perhaps it has been present through all of it, quietly waiting beneath the noise for you to notice. And maybe, after all the searching, this is what you were meant to discover. You were never being asked to become worthy of peace. You were being invited to stop abandoning the peace that was already part of your deepest nature. You were never required to become someone entirely new. You were remembering who you were before fear told you that you were incomplete. So wherever you are right now, allow yourself one quiet breath. You do not have to solve your entire life in this moment. You do not have to know what next year will bring. You do not have to carry yesterday into tomorrow. Just be here. Feel the life within you. Notice the silence beneath the thoughts. And perhaps somewhere inside that silence, you can sense something familiar, something that has been with you all along. If this reflection touched something within you, you are welcome to share in the comments what you feel ready to release or what you would like to return to in your own life. And if these quiet spiritual journeys help you reconnect with yourself, you can subscribe and continue walking with us. Until then, move gently. Forgive when you can. Release what has become too heavy. Trust what you cannot yet see. Choose love whenever you remember. And whenever the world pulls your attention in 1,000 directions, come back to the one place where peace has always been waiting. Come back to yourself.